Hi, welcome back to Create Craft Costume, where we think crafting or creating is as close to magic as we're gonna get. My name is Ashley, this is Cheryl, and we are back in Cheryl's sewing studio today. We've already talked about our pattern and maximizing our fabric, so today we're actually going to start our project.
Okay. So we are going to jump in and make the blanket. As a quick reminder, in the previous video about maximizing your fabric, the whole point here is to use the fabric that we purchased over the years or that's left over, get it used up and go for something useful. So stay tuned, we'll show you a great fun way that you can get a cute blanket made in no time with a really creative binding.
So let's get started right now.
Talked about this mermaid fabric for our bag and blanket. We're going to start with the blanket because those are the biggest pieces. Now, you've all seen fabric come like this. I have my two raw edges right here. The fold is down there somewhere. For ease and quickness, if you leave these two edges together, then I'm going to measure out our 70 inches. Then I have my two pieces and the biggest piece I have at the one end. We could unroll this and do 170 inch and then do it again. This is just quicker, so that's what I'm choosing to do today. I'm going to do my little right there. Then I'm going to lay this out. And another thing that I like to do, just because it's easier and you get a more square cut, I will fold this in half again. I'm going to square that up with my lines. There's my 15, or my mark right there for my 70 inches. Square that up. Now, depending on what kind of scissors you have, this will be easy or not. I have some super sharp scissors. You can use these. They're not my favorite thing. Ashley loves them, me not so much. So I'm just going to use my scissors.
She was trained without them.
I was, in the olden days. Okay, so here's my two pieces of 70. This is my one last piece of extra that I'm going to use for my bag. All in one piece. So there we are, my two 70-inch pieces for our blanket. Next thing, we'll sew those together. Okay, as you're watching me sew, I don't know if you've wondered why I didn't cut the selvage off before I sewed it. I get asked that a lot. The reason that I don't, I could have. But if you leave that selvage on and you match those up, you've got a great little guide to sew. And this is 1/2 inch past the edge of the selvage. It just makes a really easy line to follow. And then I'm going to come up here and I'm just going to take my little thing and I'm going to cut it right off. Just makes an easy guideline.
Out of curiosity, what would happen if you just left the selvage on? You've sewn the seam, so why is it so important to cut the selvage off?
I don't trust selvages for overall. I have pre-shrunk this fabric and the selvage did not shrink. I don't trust it not to shrink again or to curl. It's just more fabric than you need. Plus it has little holes in it and I don't trust it. I've sewn long enough that selvages are kind of funky because that's where the fabric is woven. That's how it's set up. All these little holes right here is how the warp and weft threads are going through. And so it's a tighter weave right here than it is in here. And I just know in time it's going to shift and it's going to be different. Bottom line is I don't trust selvages.
She's breaking out the real ironing board.
I am. Enough of this nonsense. Let's get serious here. Okay, we've ironed that seam open. Now we're going to do the same exact thing on the other piece. That is literally the easiest way to press open a tiny seam. Give it a little pull first to make sure it will lay flat, then run your fingers up the seam and the iron right behind it, and you'll get a super flat seam every time.
Once you have your top and your bottom together, it is time for the batting. And batting can come in two different ways. One is this. This is a pre-packaged one, and they come in different brands, different sizes. That's what you need to pay attention to. Is this one is 72 by 90, and you can cut it to whatever you need to and just save the rest for other projects. If you don't want to buy a pre-packaged one, they do also come like this. This is called a bolt. It is rolled on a cardboard tube. And no, you do not have to buy the entire bolt. You can ask at the cutting counter, you want this much, and you can leave with that part. We just use a lot of batting, so it makes sense for us to have a bolt here. No need to worry. You can leave with however much you want. Or remember, pre-packaged ones are a faster option that you don't have to go to the cutting counter for. So we have placed the batting under the back, and right now we are placing pins in the middle in order to make sure that the back and the batting does not shift when we trim up the edges. Many a project has been ruined by fabric that shifts while you are cutting. So these are not permanent. This is also not pulled tight because the only function of this is now we are going to trim the excess batting off of all of the borders and make sure that it fits our back before continuing with the top.
So we've got our two selvages. We're going to match them up. Not selvages, seams right there, a seam and a seam. That's our center of our quilt. We're going to put a pin right there. Then so we can get this squared up, we're going to go from this pin. We're going to go out to the side, matching up the pieces. Then we're going to measure this up. We're going to do the same all the way around so we get these edges lined up. Okay, we have our blanket put together with the front and the back and the batting in between. We are now ready to do the binding. And instead of doing a regular binding that you've seen before, we are going to do what at one point when I started sewing was called a self-binding blanket. So the result is to have a blanket that has the pink binding on the top. So what we're going to do, we're going to pretend that this piece right here is the pink back. We're going to pretend that these cute little animals are these little cute little mermaids on the front. So we've got our piece lined up, and yes, we are going to trim this down all the way around. It will be 2 inches on this. I've already trimmed this down for samples, not quite so much. So what we're going to do to make our mitered corners, don't freak out when I say mitered corners, they're not near as hard as they sound. We're going to come to our grid, and we're going to line up our little point right here with this 45-inch line. And that's where we're going to cut. Okay, so we've got this here on our grid, and we are going to mark that diagonal line. And then we're going to do that on every corner. Now I'm going to cut all these, just right along that line, all the way around. I'm going to take this off. Now we're going to do the mitered corners. So we're going to take these right sides together, and we are going to sew this little seam right up there, about 1/4 inch. And once we've done that, we're going to have something that looks like this. There's the one corner we haven't done. We have done all the others. You can see it's just a little 1/4 inch seam all the way around. And that's our last one. Now, after we've done this, we're going to turn it right side out. We're going to take our fingers, or I don't recommend a pin if you have a little, I don't recommend scissors. I really do recommend just work it up with your fingernail, because scissors and pins can pull the threads out at the end, and then you've got a hole in the end of this, which is easy to fix, but then your line is off. So I would recommend just working through it, working that up, pinching it down, and you've got your mitered corners. And you're going to lay this out like this. Now we're going to pretend this one is sewn, and you've got your 4 mitered corners. Now here comes the fun part. We're going to take this and we're going to just tuck it right inside. Feel around, you've got that up into the corner. Now, here comes the other fun part that I like. I like to embellish things. You can turn this little edge under, sew it just straight, no problem. That's an easy way to do that. You could take some contrasting ribbon, sew over the sides. If you're doing something that doesn't fray, you can do a zigzag. But there is your mitered corners. There is your quilt. You look on the other side, you've got no seams. We are going to do that on the bigger scale, and we're going to start by cutting that down, and we'll show you how that turns out.
As she mentioned, we're doing all those same steps, we're just scaling it up. So our top main fabric needs to be smaller than the bottom base fabric. So we're gonna cut this in 2 inches, and we're gonna mark all the way around and cut. That's our next step. Lines are all done. So now we are cutting through the batting and the top fabric to make it smaller than our bottom piece, so we can start creating those mitered corners. Ta-da!
Okay, we've got it trimmed down. Now we're getting ready to do the mitered corners. Now, Ashley, love her to death, but she always tells me that I don't say everything that's in my head. Sometimes a good thing, but this is something that I did not say earlier, and I don't know if you picked up on it or not, but you can see this is at the right angle on the grids. You can see that. There's my 45-degree line running through there. This corner has to be just a smidge, and by a smidge I mean like 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch, inside that grid line. Why, you ask? Because you have a seam allowance. So you can see there's my grid line. If I were to cut it right there, then this is going to be in the seam when I turn it around. So it's got to be just below the 45-inch grid line to cut that, because I don't want to have that stuck up in the corner of this. So we're going to cut that right across there, and then that seam's going to come down there, and this will fit flat up under in the corner. Okay, we have cut all of those diagonally. Now we're going to sew that to make the mitered corners. The trick is we want this to go up like this. We also want this edge to be turned under and finished. So in order to do that, put this together, sew those like this. But down here at the end, we're going to put this back. We're going to fold that back like that. So that is our finishing seam for the hem as it goes around on both sides. So then when we turn it, it will already be folded under. So let me sew that really quick. I'll come back and show you how this turned out, and then we'll show you on the rest of them.
If you don't roll back the sides here, like she started, that means your finishing seam is not started and you'll have to unpick this portion when you continue around to finish the blanket. But now we just have to do this on the last 3 corners, and it's the exact same steps. We roll those portions back, create this mitered corner, put the top fabric inside, and then we just need a finishing stitch. Once your corners are sewn and turned over, we are just pinning the rest of that seam under. We'll sew our finishing stitch right along here, and these pins are just going to help us keep everything attached and from not shifting and safe along the way. It is not often that we get to use our decorative stitches up here, and this is a mermaid, so I'm going to make waves. And we are using the decorative stitch 46, and we are putting it on 3.5 wide with a 1 length. And that is the stitch that I'm going to use to finish the seam.
Oh, hi, baby Yoda. I can see you. Hi.
And after you have sewn around all 4 sides, this is what it looks like. And this is the back, where you don't see any seams. You just get a decorative stitch. And now your blanket is complete. This was part 1 of our series. I was editing and decided that it took too long, so we're going to split this into 2 parts. So if you just want to learn how to make the blanket, guess what? You're done. But if you want to learn how to make a coordinating bag, please click subscribe. Okay, that way you don't forget about us, and you will see the coordinating bag video come out later. The bag is adorable. You'll love it. Great to do. Stay tuned. We'll have some fun. And you learn about piping.
Ooh.
Don't let that intimidate you. It's fine. Still watch it.